Hello, LAWsome listeners. Matt and I just wrapped up a wonderful conversation with Brooke Lively. She's really born within the law firm. I mean, her family ran a law firm. She got involved early and transitioned into really the financial aspect of really holding law firms accountable around the numbers. And she has some incredible, very direct, but relatively simple ways of looking at how to really elevate the accountability in a law firm, improve your numbers, hold others around you accountable to growing a firm, and really making quality decisions, not just for today, but especially for the future, for tomorrow, setting yourself up well for retirement. I think all of our listeners are going to get some value from this discussion. Matt, what was your take from this conversation?
I think this is a must listen for any law firm owner or administrator. I don't recall a guest that we've had that has left us with more practical takeaways in a session than Brooke has with this discussion. Just outstanding advice. She has a wealth of knowledge on the subject of, law firm finance and management and operations, really. So tremendous conversation. I hope our listeners enjoy.
Yeah, you're in for a treat. And if you haven't yet, smash that subscribe button. Make sure you stay tuned to all future LAWsome episodes. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another LAWsome episode. I'm your host, Tanner Jones, along with my co-host, Matt Smyers. We're kicking off this episode with Brooke Lively, founder of Cathedral Capital. Today's topic, ignorance isn't bliss. Facing the financial truths in your law firm. Welcome, Brooke.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We are so glad to have you. We're very familiar with you. We've seen a lot of wonderful content you've provided the legal industry, and so we're excited about what you have in store for our listeners today. And it's always helpful to get started around really your story. So maybe start with, what is Cathedral Capital and why did you build it?
I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, it was kind of an accident. It was something that I love, that I'm passionate about. I was running my family's law firm and hired someone to help us with sales and marketing. And his other clients came to me and said, "Can you do for us what you're doing for your family?" And that was when I really started to understand that law firms didn't run by the numbers. They didn't run like businesses. They were running on gut instinct and feelings. And that was costing a lot of money. And so I started a fractional CFO company just because it didn't have to be so hard. And I wanted to help all these people that, law school doesn't prepare you to run a business. It prepares you to file a motion or, argue in court. Really prepares you to pass the bar. But, it doesn't prepare you to own a business and have all these people working for you. And that's a big part of what attorneys do these days.
Absolutely. It's a huge part of what they do and a tremendous service that you provide. Let's dive right in, Brooke. So we've seen law firms experience what we would refer to as fat cat syndrome, right? Big settlements roll in, the cash is flowing. Suddenly the ebbs and flows of the business ebb. And how can they create stability and predictability in such a volatile business model that tends to change with the seasons?
There are a few things you can do. They're the shorter term and the longer term. Shorter term, it's really about good planning. It's about truly understanding your cases, especially if you're personal injury, really understanding your average case. How long does it take? How does it pay out? What stages does it have? How long should it stay in each one of those stages? Because using all of that, you can really start to forecast pretty accurately, shockingly accurately, when you're going to have revenue and when you're going to have the associated expenses. So you can start to kind of build a war chest. You should also always have a line of credit. And it's so funny because people are like, I don't need a line of credit. I just got a $3 million settlement. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's when you need to go get the line of credit, when you've got that $3 million sitting in your account, because no bank wants to loan you money when you need it. So get it now while you don't need it. Longer term, there are the companies. Milestone is a great one, where you can actually not take that $3 million in. It can go to Milestone, and you can structure that settlement so that you get X amount a year. The rest of the settlement continues to grow. You get the interest. And it pays out over 5, 6, 7 years. You don't have to pay tax on $3 million initially. You pay tax on the, however much you take out over the next 5 to 10 years. And you have it paying out enough to cover your base expenses. So then, when your nut's covered, you've got a little bit more, you can take a little bit more risk. You can feel a little bit more confident. Everybody at home knows that things are going to be okay because, the expenses at the office are covered, and you guys are going to make what you need to make.
Yeah, it's easier. Frankly, it's easier to wake up in the morning and pursue the day when you have that nut covered and the future is somewhat protected in that respect. So I love that. And I
Gives
think
you a lot of confidence.
that's it. Yeah, and with confidence comes bolder decision making. So that's fascinating. And I know you wrote a book, From Panic to Profit, Brooke, and it lays out 6 key numbers every law firm owner should know. Can you speak to those metrics and what maybe attorneys should expect from monitoring and watching that data?
Actually, let me grab it. The 6 key numbers really kind of build on themselves, and they start out pretty simply, and as you go through, they get a little bit more complicated. And I've broken them down into 6 categories, and they're not exactly the same for every single practice area, but they're pretty darn close. The first category is cash, and we all know that cash is king. And when we're talking about cash, we need to look at things like your cash balance, your AR, if you're an hourly firm that collects AR, your monthly nut. But really, the key number, the key report here, is your cash flow forecast. So how much money are you going to have at the end of the week for the next 6 to preferably 13 weeks looking forward? Because there's nothing you can do when you realize 2 days before payroll that you don't have payroll. There's a lot you can do when you realize that 8 weeks out. So you want to look at that cash flow forecast week by week. The second number is really about ideal ratios. So when I talk about ideal ratios, I talk about things like the rule of thirds. So in a law firm, 1/3 of revenue should go to the people doing the work, 1/3 should go to overhead, and that includes your marketing, and 1/3 should go to profit. PI is a little different. PI should have a higher profit margin. But you want to know how much is going to payroll, marketing, and overhead. But really the most important one, and the one that you should be monitoring, is total owner compensation. How much are you as the owner making? And you make money in a lot of different ways from your firm. You make it from your salary. You make it from profit that you take out. You make it from all those expenses you run through the firm. Meals, vacations, your children's school supplies. I don't know. I don't care. Not my business. That's between you and the IRS. We all do it. It's fine. But are you getting paid? Are you being compensated fairly for all the time, the effort, and frankly, the risk that you're taking as the owner of the firm? So the third is production. You want to look at a number around production. So production numbers are capacity, utilization, billing goals. The one that I really like to look at is, if you are an hourly firm, it's work in progress. If you're not an hourly firm, we want to look at throughput. How much is moving through the firm? And in a PI firm, what we really want to know is what percentage of cases are on time. So I mentioned earlier, really understanding your cases and knowing what phases a case has, like it's got 4 stages, and how long a case should stay in each stage. So if it should be in this stage for 37 days, and it's now 38 days, we've got a problem. So we want at least 80% of the cases within the proper stage. We all know that the faster a case moves through a PI firm, the more valuable it is. So it's really important to understand how quickly your cases are moving and if they are on time. The fourth is an easy one: budget versus actual. Are you anywhere near what you forecasted? Are you close on your revenue? And where are you on your expenses? Are you over or under? And are you over or under for a good reason or a bad reason? Sometimes it's fabulous to be over. I mean, sometimes you're over on marketing, but that's also bringing in a ton of cases, and you're like, yeah, we're happy about that. The fifth one is marketing and sales. So we want to look at things like, your conversion cycle, your conversion rates by referral source. But the one we really want to look at, the leading number, the one that tells us what's going to happen, are sales calls booked. How many, true sales calls are we having? That's what we've got to know. And then the last one is all about capacity. And, I said earlier, we want to understand our cases. We want to know the average value. We want to know how long it takes. We want to know how much pressure a case puts on the firm. So, like, how many hours does it take to work it? How many people? What's the right mix of employees? But more than anything else, we want to know net new cases. So how many cases were opened? How many cases were closed? Where are we net new? Are we growing or shrinking?
You mentioned understanding the lifespan of the case, right? And if you put it into 4 different stages and you have an understanding of when that case in theory should resolve. I'm curious, for personal injury in particular, how do you factor in the wide range of values of that case, right? It's one thing to say, in theory, this case should either settle or go to trial, or we should get paid, however you want to look at this point in time, based on historical numbers. But that value, as we know, could be anywhere from 0 to, whatever that is. How do you factor that into the equation?
So you've got to look at it. You have to divide your cases up. We cannot compare a trucking case with a TBI to a hospital slip and fall. That's apples to oranges, right? So we have to look at our trucking cases. Okay, so we look at our trucking cases, and we understand that these are the 4 inflection points. I happen to use 4 because I have a client that did trucking cases. We happen to know that there were 4 stages in his trucking cases, so I'm going to use that. Because those cases are those cases, they always filed. So we knew what point they were going to go to. They never, they, it was never that first offer in the, when they sent the demand letter. It wasn't that type of case. Now, somebody gets rear-ended, that has a different, that one's going to get settled. That's a pre-lit case. Every type of case, there is that bell curve, right? And you've got the ones on the ends. You've got those outliers. But it's really that standard deviation in the middle where 80% of your cases are. And that's what we're looking at, is documenting that 80% that sits in the middle.
When you first start to work with a firm and get a look under the hood, so to speak, what are the most common financial red flags that you see?
Oh, wow. That depends. Can I give you the attorney answer if it depends? I think that the biggest one is simply lack of knowledge. I think that a lot of attorneys are afraid to look under the hood. It is not generally as bad as you think it is. And it's not that scary. And, we can talk you through what it looks like. What we see a lot of is inefficiency in operations. We see things, and the best way I can explain it is surgeons emptying bedpans. Do we have attorneys doing paralegal work? Do we have things being reworked, being touched multiple times? Are we not planning well, and is that causing us issues? So there are all kinds of things. Are we not getting a good return on our marketing? Have we thrown $150,000 into TV ads and haven't gotten one call? Okay, well, if we put $150,000 in, and I'm just randomly making up numbers, over 9 months, and we've gotten 0 response, okay, maybe we should think that might not be an ideal option for us.
I think it may stem back to like the fat cat syndrome, where maybe you're so well off as a business in certain instances where you tend to avoid it, or you think you'll come back to it tomorrow. I don't know, there may be a million different reasons behind that, but once you've identified those individual problems, which you listed several, what are some of the first steps an attorney can begin to take as a law firm owner to turn things around? Is it just simply awareness, education?
Yeah, a lot of it is awareness. A lot of it is, let's start looking at some things. Let's create a plan. Let's look at, there's certain things. The TV ads, let's just cut those. The billboards, we can't just stop. We've got contracts, and if you tick off the billboard companies, you're never going to get another billboard again. So we're not going to do that. But, how can we restructure? What does it look like if we do this? Do we need to migrate to different software? Do we simply need to integrate software to give us better information? And a lot of times, that's one of the first things that we do, is we say, we're not getting good data because nothing's integrated. And we're using different names for the same thing in the 4 different pieces of software that we use. So some things are easy and some things we have to plan for. Some things, we put on the list and say that's going to happen in 6 months for these reasons.
Speaking of planning, we all dream of retirement. Lawyers are no exception, right? What are some things that a lawyer, especially a business owner, can start to do, some habits that they can form financially that are going to set them up well for that eventuality of wanting to retire?
I think that the big one, you all talked about those big PI settlements. Those are your retirement. Don't feel like, woohoo, I got this big settlement in. Let's put it all back in. Let's get more cases. Take some risk off the table. Invest some of it. Put it aside because you do need to take care of yourself and your family. If you can get your firm to the point, depending upon what your breakdown is in a PI firm, if you're, 60% pre-lit, 40% lit, or, 70-30, hopefully that pre-lit is actually covering your nut. So then those litigation cases are your big profit. Those litigation cases are your retirement. Another thing to do is think about selling. You've never been able to sell a law firm as easily as you can now. There are 3 states in the District of Columbia that let non-attorneys own law firms. Private equity has gotten tired of waiting for the other 47 states to catch up, and they are taking law firms, breaking them into pieces, and they're buying the operating companies, which is working really well. You could do that. You can sell to private equity today in, Montana if you structure the deal properly. But you can only do that if you have set up your firm in such a way that it doesn't need you. So a firm typically sells for 2.4 to 4 times that total owner benefit that I talked about. Private equity is buying them slightly higher. To get to that 4x, it has to be not dependent on you. It has to not be dependent on you being the sole rainmaker. It has to not be dependent on you being the legal brain or the one doing all of the work. It has to not be dependent upon you to write the checks and understand the finances. Operations needs to run without you. You need to be able to not be integral to the firm. So the more you can set the firm up to run without you, the better off you're going to be. You're going to be better off because your firm will tend to just run better. It will tend to be more profitable. It will tend to put less pressure on you, so people at home are happier. It's the firm that everybody wants to own, right? It's mailbox money.
We're seeing that more and more these days, even with younger law firm owners that are taking this mindset from the very beginning, which is they're starting out trying to build a saleable business, and they're treating the law firm like a business and not putting so much value, or trying to not put so much value into their goodwill into the business and having it be so integral to the business itself. And I've noticed a shift in that just over the last 5 or 6 years, that we are seeing more of that, more business-minded young lawyers owning law firms with that end goal in mind.
Well, and it's all about the structure that you create. And so I help law firms implement EOS in their firms. And I only work with law firms. I'm the only EOS implementer that works exclusively with law firms. And having that structure to build on gives you what you need to do that, so that it's not built on a person. EOS is the entrepreneurial operating system. And there are 6 key components that you try to strengthen. We want to get them to 80% strong. We're never going to be 100% strong. That's utopia. No one's perfect. But the 6 components are your vision. Where are you headed? So many owners have this in their head, but the rest of the team doesn't know where you're going, and certainly can't tell other people where you're going. And if they can, it's probably not the same vision that you have. People. Do you have the right people in the right seats? That's a Jim Collins thing. Data. Personally, I love this. I'm a CFO. Are you running your firm on facts, figures, and true information, or are you doing it on gut instincts and hopes and prayers? And, when you do it that way, you wake up at 3 a.m. and you question every decision you've made. And you make every decision 6, 7, 8 times. The next one is issues. You cannot build a great law firm until you start to solve issues at the root and make them go away forever. If you are just taking today's problem and slapping a Band-Aid on it and shoving it in the corner and moving on, it's going to be back, bleeding worse than ever, pretty soon. So we've got to actually fix that problem. The 5th one is process. And attorneys are like, I don't want to do process. And, when we talk about process, and every attorney sees like the piece of paper that says, turn computer on, press this button, hit enter here, do this, do that. That's not what we're talking about. What are the 20% of the steps that get us 80% of the way there? We don't need some 700-page SOP manual. No one's going to use that. However, if we can get everyone doing things the same way, if we can get everyone doing things the right way the first time, it costs us a lot less because we're not doing rework. It makes it easier to manage people. And frankly, it makes it more fun because you're not yelling at people about them not doing it the right way.
And it makes it easier to train people.
It's so much easier to train people. And then the last one is traction. And this is really about bringing the vision down to the ground and executing on it. Vision without traction is basically a hallucination. So how do we execute on that? How do we make that happen week in and week out so that we get where we want to go?
Very helpful, very useful, and I'm sure a real challenge. Going back even to the idea of thinking through retirement and setting your firm up. This is a challenge to most entrepreneurs because they're wired to be able to control and to really guide it themselves. So I think we're all hopefully enthusiastic and overcoming that ourselves as we look ahead.
You're right. That control thing that's an issue, and that's hard. And as attorneys, you're trained to make sure that everything's right, because making sure that everything's right that's a big deal. If the language isn't right in the contract, if there are consequences to that. I've got a book I've written a book in conjunction with EOS that is basically how to implement EOS in law firms. And it comes out February 24th. It's called Scaling Law. And there is an entire chapter dedicated to that concept of letting go and why it's important, why you do it, and how to get past that, because it is a very hard thing to let go, but you cannot grow and scale your firm until you do.
We've talked about some red flags financially, law firms opening up their books, being very vulnerable and showing you, here's where we stand today and help us get to where we're going tomorrow. But on the other side of that coin would be sometimes you open up the books and you see that things are very healthy and firms are doing very well. What are some of those few elements that you see commonly that illustrate a firm is very healthy?
Well, I mentioned the rule of thirds. So 1/3 of revenue going to people, 1/3 going to overhead, 1/3 going to profit. When we're talking about PI, we're usually pushing the profit closer to 50+% because you can. We usually see a really healthy compensation structure, one that incentivizes everybody to align with the firm and what the firm wants. So, it's not just about top line revenue. If we want the attorneys to be going out and finding new cases, we're incentivizing them to do that. And, we're looking at firms that have good data and are using it. And they're not just using it, it's not just the owner that's using it. They're using it at all different levels of the firm. Everybody has some kind of number that they are responsible for delivering. So we're not just sending a paralegal out and saying, go, and then telling them they're not doing their job. We're saying, this is your job and this is how we're going to measure you. And then we're measuring them every week so that they know if they're failing or succeeding.
Yeah, we've spoken quite a bit actually on the podcast around general KRAs, key results areas, and whatever you call them. It's having everyone has a number, everyone has a focus, and that levels up accountability, no doubt. Another stat or data point that you mentioned earlier, which I really like, and I don't hear a lot of law firms tracking it directly, is that new net cases. It's just a perfect indicator as to whether you are increasing your caseload. Are you growing? Are you staying flat? Or are you declining? And it's one of those, in many instances, early signals that can wake you up to making some bigger decisions or taking action in certain areas in the business, which I find incredible.
Well, and that's one of those things. You should know what a team is. So I'm going to say a team is one attorney, one paralegal, and half a legal assistant. I'm totally making this up, right? And a team can handle 37 cases at any given time. Well, if we're bringing on, net new 10 cases a month, we're going to need a new team basically every 4 months. How long does it take to hire an attorney, guys? You don't turn that around in 48 hours. It's going to take you 4 months. So you better get on that now. Because if you wait until all of a sudden everyone's screaming that they're overloaded, you're going to burn your people out. So being able to plan ahead and see, you can plan ahead financially, you can plan ahead from a workload standpoint. It's that being able to see into the future that makes the difference.
Brooke, you've presented a lot of challenging thoughts and mindset shifts maybe that our listeners should be taking as they approach next year, and we're grateful for it. I'm curious, are there any questions you would have wished we would have asked you?
I don't know. You guys covered a lot of different things.
Well, hopefully we've thoroughly covered the topic. You've been great. We're grateful for your time. You've released some books in the past. You have one forthcoming in 2026. So we'll make sure we drop the book notes in the show notes so that people can get access to that, hopefully early access. And I would ask you, Brooke, how can our listeners find you?
I think the easiest way to connect with me is by email, brooke@cathcap.com. CATHCAP.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Thanks, guys.